Chapter 1. The Silent Markers. The old cemetery had long been forgotten by the town, hidden beneath overgrown trees and tangled vines. The wrought iron gate stood rusted, barely hanging onto its hinges, whispering its eerie welcome to those brave enough to step inside. Mark, an eager historian, had always been fascinated by the legends surrounding the graveyard. Some said the tombstones bore names that didn't belong to the town's past. Others believed the ground itself shifted under the cover of darkness, hiding something unnatural. As Mark pushed open the gate, a sharp creak shattered the silence. His flashlight flickered as he stepped onto the cracked stone path, his breath visible in the cold night air. Rows of weathered tombstones stood at odd angles, some sunken into the earth as if trying to bury their secrets deeper. He moved carefully, reading the names carved into the stone, but something felt wrong. One of the markers had no name. Unlike the others, which bore intricate carvings of dates and epitaphs, this one was blank, only a jagged crack running down its center. Mark's fingers traced the surface, a strange chill crawling up his spine. The wind shifted, carrying with it a whisper, soft but unmistakable. "Leave." He spun around, his flashlight casting long, trembling shadows between the graves. There was no one there. The trees rustled, their branches swaying, but the graveyard remained still. A rational voice in his head told him it was the wind, but deep inside, he knew something was watching. Then he saw it. A fresh patch of disturbed soil near the nameless grave. The ground had been dug up recently, yet there was no sign of who or what had done it. Kneeling, he brushed away the loose dirt, revealing something beneath. A small, rusted locket. Mark hesitated before prying it open. Inside was a faded photograph of a woman with hollow eyes, her face frozen in an expression of sorrow, and beside her picture, a note written in trembling ink. "They will not let me rest." The whisper came again, this time closer. "Go now." Mark didn't need to be told twice. He stumbled to his feet, gripping the locket tightly, his pulse pounding in his ears. As he turned towards the gate, the blank tombstone cracked further, splitting down the middle with an ear-splitting snap. He ran, the cold night air slicing through him, the whispers now a chorus behind him, rising and falling like a mournful wail. The gate groaned as he shoved it open, metal screeching against metal, and as he burst onto the road, silence fell over the graveyard once more. The only thing left to prove he had ever been there was the locket, still clutched in his shaking hands. Chapter 2. The unearthed secret mark could not shake the feeling that the graveyard had marked him in some way. Ever since he left, a lingering coldness clung to his skin, and the whisper from the nameless grave echoed in his mind. He had tried to convince himself it was just the wind, just his imagination playing tricks on him, but the rusted locket in his pocket told him otherwise. Unable to resist the pull of curiosity, Mark spent the following day researching the cemetery. The town records had little information, only confirming that the graveyard had been abandoned decades ago due to unsettling circumstances. There were no burial records beyond a certain point and no mention of the blank grave. That night, against his better judgment, Mark returned. The full moon bathed the graveyard in silver light, casting eerie shadows across the tombstones. He gripped his flashlight, stepping cautiously past the rusted gate. The wind was still, the silence heavier than before, as if the graveyard itself was waiting. He moved toward the nameless grave, heart hammering. The disturbed soil had been covered, as though someone or something had tried to erase the evidence of his previous visit. Kneeling down, he began to dig with his hands, the cold dirt clinging to his fingers. Then his fingers scraped against something hard. A wooden box, worn with age. Mark pried it open, his breath catching as he uncovered a collection of brittle papers, their ink faded but still legible. The documents were letters, pleas for help, written in desperate, shaking hands. Some spoke of hearing voices in the wind. Others described waking up to find their loved ones missing, their graves dug open. One letter, more recent than the others, caught his eye. Unlike the rest, the ink was darker, fresher, as if written not long ago. I was never meant to be buried here. They took me. They will take you too. A chill crawled up Mark's spine. He looked up, the cemetery stretching around him in ghostly silence. Then, as he reached to gather the letters, a shadow moved in the periphery of his vision. He wasn't alone. The ground beneath him trembled. Chapter 3. The Whispering Tombstones. Mark's breath came in short gasps as the ground beneath him trembled. The rustling wind carried whispers, faint and fragmented, like voices speaking from beneath the soil. He clutched the old wooden box tighter, his fingers numb against the damp wood. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, but something stronger, an unnatural pull, kept him rooted to the spot. The tombstones around him seemed to shift, rearranging themselves in the dim moonlight. He blinked, his vision swimming with uncertainty. Then he heard it. A single word, clear and deliberate. "Stay." A chill ran through his spine. He whipped around, expecting to see someone standing behind him, but the graveyard was empty. His flashlight flickered, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the ground. He aimed the beam at the nameless grave once more, its cracked surface now marred with deep, fresh carvings. He leaned closer, his heartbeat thudding against his ribs. "Help us!" His breath hitched. He reached out, tracing the deep gouges in the stone, when suddenly a soft sob echoed between the graves. It wasn't the wind. It was human, raw, desperate. "Who's there?" Mark called out, his voice breaking the eerie silence. The sobbing stopped. Then, from the rows of tombstones, a figure stepped forward. A woman, her pale dress tattered, her long hair falling over her face. She stood between the graves, unmoving, her head tilted downward as if unwilling to meet his gaze. Mark felt his feet grow heavy, an overwhelming sense of dread wrapping around his chest. The air thickened, pressing against his lungs. He forced himself to take a step forward, lifting his flashlight toward the woman. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes were hollow voids, empty pits of darkness. Her mouth opened wide, but no sound came out, only the rush of wind, cold and suffocating. The whispering voices surged around him, rising into a frenzied wail. "Go now!" The woman lunged. Mark stumbled back, dropping the box as the flashlight flickered wildly. He scrambled to his feet, his pulse roaring in his ears. The graveyard twisted around him, the tombstones now shifting, closing in. He ran. The whispers followed, relentless, chasing him toward the rusted gates. As he reached them, he risked a final glance over his shoulder. The woman stood where he had left her, motionless, watching. The whispering had stopped, but one last word cut through the silence, seeping into his mind like ice. "Come back." Chapter 4. The Gravekeeper's Warning. Mark barely slept after his encounter in the graveyard. The whispers, the shifting tombstones, the woman with hollow eyes. They haunted him, replaying in his mind like a broken record. He had spent the night researching, but nothing in the town's history explained what he had seen. There was only one person who might have answers: the old gravekeeper, Henry Atwood. Mark found Henry at the cemetery's caretaker shed, a weathered man with sunken eyes and hands calloused by years of tending to forgotten graves. He sat on an old wooden bench, sharpening a rusted spade. When Mark approached, Henry didn't look up. "I was wondering when you'd come," he muttered, his voice like dried leaves. "They always do." Mark hesitated. "They." Henry exhaled, setting the spade down. "The ones who dig too deep into this place. The ones who don't listen to the warnings." "What happened here?" Mark pressed. "Who was buried in that grave with no name?" Henry's gaze darkened. "No one knows. No records. No family. Just a plot that shouldn't exist. A place that don't belong here." Mark swallowed hard. "I saw someone. A woman. She." Henry cut him off. "Then you need to leave." "I can't. There are voices, letters from people who went missing. Something's wrong with this graveyard." Henry's jaw clenched. "Ain't nothing wrong with the graveyard, son. It's the thing buried beneath it." Silence hung between them. Mark's mind raced, connecting the pieces. "Then help me. Please." Henry sighed, rubbing a hand over his lined face. "You already seen too much. But if you're serious about finding answers, there's one place left to look." He stood, motioning for Mark to follow. "The crypt, the oldest part of the cemetery. If there's truth to what you say, it'll be down there." Mark's skin prickled as he nodded. Whatever secrets the graveyard held, they were buried deep, and he was about to unearth them. Chapter 5. Shadows Beneath the Soil. Mark followed Henry through the graveyard, the old man's lantern casting a dim glow against the looming tombstones. The air was thick with decay, and each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted their presence. Mark's grip tightened on the flashlight in his hand, his nerves buzzing with unease. "We ain't supposed to be here," Henry muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "The ones before us, they disturbed things that should have been left alone." Mark turned to the coffin, his flashlight beam illuminating the carved inscription on the lid. The words were written in a language he didn't recognize, but as he traced his fingers over the lettering, a sudden realization struck him. The words were fading. "That's why it's waking up," Mark breathed. "The epitaph. It's breaking." The ground trembled violently. The walls of the crypt groaned as cracks split through the stone. The air grew unbearably cold, and a thick, black mist poured from the coffin, seeping into the crevices of the chamber. Henry frantically flipped through the pages of the book, his breath ragged. "We have to rewrite it before it fully escapes." "How?" Mark demanded, panic rising in his chest. Henry jabbed a finger at his father's writings. "Blood." Mark's stomach twisted. "You can't be serious." "It's the only way. The original curse was bound in blood. If we don't..." The corpse twitched. Henry grabbed Mark's hand and sliced his palm with a rusted knife. Mark hissed in pain, but Henry wasted no time pressing his bleeding palm against the lid of the coffin. The blood dripped into the carved letters, and the effect was immediate. The mist recoiled. The whispers turned into agonized screams. The crypt shook violently, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. The corpse let out one final, guttural wail before its body turned to dust, collapsing into the coffin. The mist spiraled violently before retreating into the cracks of the stone, and in an instant, the crypt fell silent. Mark collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The coffin was once again sealed. the inscription glowing faintly as if regaining its strength. Henry slumped against the wall, the book slipping from his grasp. "It's done," he muttered. "For now." Mark clenched his wounded hand, staring at the coffin, his mind spinning. They had sealed whatever it was, but for how long? And what if, next time, the epitaph didn't hold? Chapter 8. The wailing spirits. The silence in the crypt was short-lived. Mark barely had time to catch his breath before a chilling wail pierced through the air, reverberating off the stone walls. It was a sound unlike anything he had ever heard. Grief-stricken, tormented, and unrelenting. The very ground beneath them seemed to hum with the energy of the souls that had long been trapped. "It's not over," Henry muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "The spirits. They were bound to it. Now they're free." The temperature in the crypt plummeted, and Mark's breath turned to mist. The walls bulged as if something unseen was pressing against them, and suddenly, the darkness around them began to take shape. Shadows flickered, twisting into distorted figures. Their hollow eyes locked onto Mark and Henry. Their mouths stretched wide, but instead of voices, only the wailing continued, growing, rising, until it felt like the very air was vibrating with sorrow. "What do we do?" Mark's voice wavered. "We sealed the coffin. The inscription is holding." Henry's hands trembled as he clutched his father's book. "They ain't tied to the coffin, boy. They're tied to the curse. That curse has been feeding on them for centuries. And now they don't know where to go." The figures began to move toward them, their spectral bodies dragged across the floor, arms outstretched, skeletal fingers clawing at the air. One passed directly through Mark, and he gasped as an unbearable cold consumed him, sinking into his bones. Images flooded his mind, memories that weren't his own. A man being dragged to the crypt, his screams swallowed by the night. A woman clutching her child, only for both to disappear into the shadows. A group of townsfolk sealing the crypt with blood, their faces twisted with guilt and fear. Mark stumbled, his vision blurring. The spirits' wails grew deafening, their sorrow pressing against his skull. He fell to his knees, his breath shallow. "They want release," he whispered. Henry knelt beside him, flipping desperately through the pages of the book. "There's gotta be a way. We have to finish what was started. The ones before us, they tried to bury it all, but these souls were left behind." The shadows converged. The entire crypt shook, dust and debris raining down. The spirits screamed in unison, their agony peaking. Mark clenched his fists. "We have to set them free." Henry stopped flipping the pages. His eyes met Mark's, filled with realization. "The locket." Mark hesitated, then reached into his pocket. The rusted locket felt heavier than before, pulsating with an unseen energy. He opened it, the faded photograph of the sorrowful woman staring back at him. The spirits froze. The wailing softened. Henry placed his hand on the coffin. "We use it. We finish the burial. The right way." With a deep breath, Mark placed the locket atop the sealed coffin. A sudden gust of wind tore through the crypt, extinguishing their lantern. The darkness was absolute. Then, one by one, the spirits began to fade. The wailing ceased. The air settled. The crypt once again silent. Mark collapsed against the stone wall, his limbs weak. The locket lay motionless atop the coffin, its glow fading. Henry exhaled heavily, his shoulders slumping in exhaustion. "It's done," he said, though his voice carried no relief. "But that don't mean it's over." Mark nodded, staring at the sealed crypt. Something told him this place would never truly rest. Chapter 9. The Grave of No Name. The crypt was silent, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching. The air remained thick, heavy with the remnants of sorrow that lingered within the ancient stone walls. Henry exhaled shakily beside him, clutching his father's book like a lifeline. "It's over," Henry muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "The spirits are gone. The locket sealed them." Mark wasn't convinced. His gaze flickered back to the coffin, its carved epitaph now glowing faintly, as if the curse had been mended. But something else caught his eye. The disturbed soil near the crypt's entrance. It wasn't from their steps. "Someone else was here," Mark whispered, kneeling down to inspect the soft earth. "Recently." Henry stiffened. "No one comes here but fools like us." But Mark wasn't so sure. The graveyard had secrets, and not all of them had been buried. He traced his fingers over the dirt, brushing away the top layer. To his horror, he uncovered a skeletal hand reaching from the soil. The fingers, long and gnarled, curled slightly, as if clawing for the surface. Mark recoiled, heart hammering. "It's not finished," he whispered. "There's another grave, one that was never given a name." Henry took a step back, his face pale. "That ain't a grave, boy. That's a warning." The earth trembled beneath them, a deep, guttural sound, like a breath drawn from the depths of the earth, rumbled through the crypt. Mark scrambled backward as the skeletal hand twitched. Then it moved. A shuddering groan escaped from below, and the ground split further. The skeletal figure began to rise, its empty eye sockets turned toward them. A voice, not of the spirits they had freed, but of something older, something that had never been put to rest, filled the chamber. "You thought you could bury me, but I never left." The crypt shook violently, and Mark realized with growing horror they had sealed the wrong grave. Chapter 10. Beyond the cemetery gates. The ground beneath Mark and Henry rumbled violently as the skeletal figure pulled itself free from the earth. Its hollow eye sockets burned with an unnatural glow, and a wretched groan escaped its jaw as if it were tasting the air for the first time in centuries. Mark stumbled back, gripping Henry's arm as the walls of the crypt trembled, dust raining down from above. "We need to run," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising wails that echoed from the tombs. Henry didn't hesitate. He turned on his heel and sprinted toward the passage leading out of the crypt, pulling Mark along with him. The air thickened with an unnatural weight, as though the very darkness was pressing down upon them. Shadows danced along the walls, shifting into distorted figures, faces twisted in agony, mouths stretched in silent screams. The skeletal creature took its first step forward, and with it, the entire chamber shook. The mist that had once retreated now slithered back, curling around the creature's limbs, feeding its strength. The whispers returned, but this time they were no longer pleading. They were warning. It was never meant to leave. Mark and Henry reached the base of the stairs, their lungs burning. Henry shoved Mark ahead of him. "Go, I'll seal it." "Henry, you can't. Go!" Mark hesitated only for a second before bounding up the steps, his legs burning with exhaustion. As he reached the top, he threw himself onto the cold ground of the graveyard, gulping in fresh air. The night sky stretched above him, the moonlight casting long shadows over the forgotten tombstones. But the ground continued to tremble. Henry was still down there. Mark turned back, heart hammering. He could see Henry at the bottom of the stairs, chanting something from his father's book. The skeletal figure lurched toward him, its bony fingers reaching, its mouth opening in a silent, endless scream. The passage was closing. Henry looked up at Mark one last time. "Tell them to never come back," he shouted. Then the ground beneath Henry cracked wide open and the tomb swallowed him whole. The tremors stopped. The wails ceased. The night was silent once more. Mark fell to his knees, his breath ragged, his body shaking. The graveyard was still. No shifting tombstones, no whispering voices. It was as if the crypt had never existed, as if Henry had never been there. But Mark knew the truth. He picked up the leather-bound book Henry had left behind, the pages still open to the last incantation. The words were smeared with blood. He closed it carefully, his fingers trembling. He turned toward the cemetery gates, the weight of what had happened pressing down on him. He had come seeking the truth, and now he was the only one left to tell it. As he stepped beyond the cemetery gates, a final whisper brushed against his ear, soft, almost mournful. "You sealed one, but another will rise."
Chapter 1. The Creaking Silence. Thomas Sinclair had always been fascinated by abandoned places, but the old house at the edge of town was different. The locals spoke in hushed tones about strange noises coming from beneath its floorboards, low groans, whispers, and creaks that didn't match the rhythm of an aging structure settling into the earth. One stormy evening, driven by an insatiable curiosity, he decided to investigate. As he stepped inside, dust swirled in the faint glow of his flashlight. The house was deathly silent, except for the occasional sound of wind rattling the windows. He moved cautiously, every footstep eliciting a protest from the wooden planks beneath him. But then, something strange happened. One particular board let out a long, drawn-out creak, different from the rest, almost as if it were responding to him. Thomas stopped, his pulse quickening. He crouched, running his fingers over the uneven floor. The wood felt oddly warm, pulsing with a faint vibration. He tapped it lightly, and the sound that came back wasn't just hollow, it was layered, almost as if something was shifting underneath. A sudden gust of wind slammed a door upstairs, making him jump. He forced a breath and refocused. He had to know what was beneath this house. Grabbing a nearby crowbar, he wedged it beneath the creaky board and pushed. The plank resisted at first, then snapped upward with an almost relieved sigh. Darkness yawned below him. The space beneath the house was larger than he had expected, and a thick, musty air wafted up, laced with something more unsettling, the faint, metallic scent of decay. Shining his flashlight into the void, he caught glimpses of scattered bones, old and brittle. His breath hitched, but there was something else down there, something moving. A whisper curled up from the darkness, slithering into his ears like a breath not meant for him. "You shouldn't be here." Thomas lurched backward, his flashlight trembling. The silence returned, heavier this time, pressing against his chest like an unseen weight. But as he scrambled away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the creaking hadn't been random. It had been a warning. Chapter 2. The Uneven Boards. Thomas sat on the dusty floor, his heart pounding as the last echoes of the whisper faded into silence. His flashlight quivered in his grasp, casting erratic shadows on the walls. He forced himself to focus. He had uncovered something buried beneath his house, something that wasn't supposed to be disturbed. He crawled closer to the opening he had made, his breath shallow. The floorboards were more uneven here, shifting slightly under his weight, as though something below them was alive. He reached for his crowbar again, pressing against another board. It groaned under the pressure, and then, crack! The wood splintered, revealing more of the dark void beneath. As he peered deeper, he saw them, more bones. But this time, they weren't scattered. They were arranged in an unsettling pattern, as if someone or something had deliberately placed them there. A rusted locket lay nestled among them, its delicate chain draped over a yellowed rib cage. Thomas hesitated before picking it up. The metal was ice cold, despite the warmth of the room. He pried the locket open. Inside was a faded photograph of a woman with hollow eyes and an unreadable expression. Scribbled on the inner casing were 2 words: "Help me." A shiver ran down his spine. He turned back toward the hole when the floorboards beneath him trembled violently, sending a fresh wave of dust into the air. Then a low guttural sound, almost like breathing, rose from the darkness below. Thomas scrambled backward, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The house had been abandoned for decades. No one should be here. And yet, something was. He needed to get out. But as he turned toward the exit, a cold gust swept through the room, slamming the door shut. The house wasn't letting him leave. Chapter 3. The hollow chamber. The air in the house had changed. Thomas could feel it pressing against his skin. Heavier now, more oppressive. He hesitated before looking back down into the dark void beneath the floorboards. Whatever was hidden down there had been buried for a reason. And yet, he could not shake the overwhelming need to uncover its secrets. Slowly, he swung his legs over the opening and lowered himself into the chamber below. His boots landed on a damp, earthen floor, the scent of rot and mold thick in the air. He cast his flashlight around the space, revealing walls lined with wooden beams that were warped and blackened with age. In the dim light, he saw something carved into the beams. Symbols, unfamiliar and jagged, etched deeply into the wood. He traced one with his fingers, feeling its rough, uneven surface. It was then that he noticed the ground beneath his feet wasn't just damp, it was soft, shifting slightly under his weight, as if something had been buried there. As he crouched down, running his hands over the loose dirt, a sharp whisper filled the chamber. "Go back." The voice was distorted, layered with the overlapping echoes, as though multiple voices were speaking at once. Thomas whipped around, his flashlight shaking as he swept the beam across the space. The shadows seemed to move on their own, stretching and shifting unnaturally. His breath hitched as his light landed on a figure standing at the far end of the chamber. It wasn't human, at least not anymore. The figure was draped in tattered fabric, its face obscured by a mass of shadow that seemed to ripple as though alive. Thomas stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs. The whispering grew louder, circling around him. The walls of the chamber trembled, the ancient symbols beginning to glow faintly. The ground beneath him gave way. Thomas plunged downward, the world swallowed by darkness. His scream lost to the void. Chapter 4. The Forgotten Bones. The fall felt endless. Thomas stumbled through the void, his limbs flailing as he grasped for anything to slow his descent. The air was thick, almost syrupy, distorting his perception of time. Then, impact. His body crashed onto cold, damp stone, pain radiating through his ribs and knees. He groaned, struggling to lift his head, his flashlight flickering weakly beside him. He had landed in a cavernous chamber. the walls carved from jagged rock and slick with moisture. A foul, metallic scent filled the air, making him gag. As he raised his light, the beam revealed scattered bones. Hundreds of them piled in heaps against the walls. Some were yellowed with age, while others looked disturbingly fresh. His breath hitched in his throat. These weren't just human remains. Among them were skulls and rib cages, twisted in unnatural shapes, as if their owners had been something else. A rustling sound echoed through the chamber, making him freeze. Something was moving in the darkness beyond his light's reach. He squinted, trying to make out a form in the shifting shadows. Then, a voice, low, guttural, vibrating through the stone itself. "You are not the first." Thomas's pulse pounded in his ears. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. The bones beneath him shifted, disturbed by something unseen. Then, a skeletal hand, long, impossibly thin, rose from the pile beside him and gripped his ankle. He screamed, kicking wildly, the brittle fingers snapping like twigs. Scrambling backward, he knocked over more bones, sending them clattering to the ground. The whispering returned, surrounding him, the voices overlapping in a desperate chorus. "We were left here. We were buried here. We are still here." The walls trembled, and a deep, resonant groan rumbled through the cavern. Dust rained down from above as the ceiling cracked. Whatever force had kept these bones trapped was waking up. Thomas turned, spotting an opening at the far end of the chamber. He forced himself to move, ignoring the stabbing pain in his ribs, stumbling over bones as he ran. The whispers chased him, growing louder, clawing at his mind. Then, a voice unlike the others, a single, mournful cry, pierced through the cacophony. "Help us!" Thomas hesitated for just a moment, but it was long enough. The ground beneath him cracked open, and the darkness surged forward, swallowing him whole. Chapter 5. The Whispering Echoes. Thomas landed hard on the ground, his body aching from the fall. Darkness enveloped him, broken only by the faint glow of his flashlight rolling away from him. He scrambled to retrieve it, his fingers brushing against something cold and hard. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized it was another bone, smooth and brittle under his touch. The whispers returned, more insistent this time. They curled around his ears, pressing against his skull. "You must listen." One voice sighed, while another wept. "He sees you now." His breath came in short gasps, and his pulse pounded against his ribs. He was not alone. He turned the flashlight upward and nearly dropped it. The chamber he had fallen into was larger than he expected, with towering stone walls covered in strange carvings. The symbols were older than the ones he had seen before, etched deeply into the rock, as if meant to last for centuries. Some of them pulsed faintly, as if responding to his presence. The ground beneath him shifted. He froze. It wasn't just dirt. It was layers upon layers of bones, packed so tightly together that they formed the floor of the chamber. His stomach twisted at the realization. A sound, a slow, deliberate scraping, sent fresh fear coursing through his veins. He whipped the flashlight toward the noise. A dark shape loomed in the distance, impossibly tall, its form shifting in and out of focus like smoke refusing to take a solid shape. Who are you?" he stammered. The figure did not respond. Instead, the whispers around him grew louder, filling his head with words he could not understand. The shadows stretched, reaching toward him, and the air turned icy. The bones beneath him rattled as if something beneath him was stirring, waking. He had to get out. Now heart hammering, Thomas turned and ran, the whispers following him, their voices rising to a desperate wail. "Don't leave us. You must listen. He's watching." But he didn't stop. He didn't dare. The darkness behind him surged forward, swallowing everything in its path. Chapter 6. The Shadow Below. Thomas ran blindly through the darkness, his breath ragged, his heart hammering against his ribs. The whispers followed him, growing louder, more insistent. He could hear them in his bones now, a vibration of voices that made his skin crawl. The flashlight in his trembling hands flickered as he stumbled forward, trying to find any sign of an exit from this nightmare beneath the house. The air grew colder, thick with an unnatural chill. He could feel something shifting in the darkness around him, something vast and ancient, watching. The whispering stopped suddenly, replaced by a deep silence so absolute it made his ears ring. The shadows along the walls stirred, peeling away from the stone like living things. They slithered, twisting together, forming an amorphous shape that towered over him. Thomas froze. The entity before him had no true form, only a shifting mass of darkness, tendrils stretching toward him. Then came the voice, not whispering this time, but deep, guttural, as if spoken from the depths of the earth itself. "You do not belong here." The floor trembled beneath him, cracks splintering outward like jagged veins. A powerful force surged forward, sending Thomas sprawling to the ground. He barely had time to react before the shadows reached for him, clawing at his limbs with an unseen grip. He screamed, thrashing wildly, but the force dragged him closer, pulling him toward the abyss at the center of the chamber. He dug his nails into the ground, struggling against the impossible strength pulling him downward. The faces in the shadows became clearer, twisted, anguished, hollow-eyed remnants of those who had come before him. Their mouths moved in silent screams, their expressions frozen in eternal torment. Thomas felt the pressure tightening around his body, suffocating him. Then, from the depths of the darkness, came a whisper. Not the others. This was different, gentle, familiar. Thomas, his eyes widened. The voice was soft, pleading, one he had only heard in old recordings. It was his grandmother's voice. Thomas let go. A surge of memories flooded his mind. Her stories, the way she used to warn him never to go near this house. She had known. She had always known. With a desperate cry, Thomas yanked the locket from his pocket and held it up. The silver glinted weakly in the dim light, but the reaction was immediate. The shadows recoiled violently, screeching in agony. The grip on his body loosened. The tendrils retreated, writhing away from the small, insignificant object in his hands. The chamber shook, the stone walls splitting apart. Thomas scrambled to his feet, sprinting toward the only visible passage, lungs burning. Behind him, the darkness roared, a guttural howl that echoed through the cavern. He didn't stop running until he saw light ahead. Chapter 7. The Buried Truth. Thomas stumbled forward, his breath ragged, his mind reeling from the horrors he had just escaped. The light ahead grew brighter as he pressed on, illuminating a vast underground chamber. Unlike the previous caverns, this one was structured, almost man-made. Arched doorways lined the stone walls, their surfaces etched with more of the strange symbols that seemed to follow him at every turn. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone slab, covered in layers of dust and grime. Thomas hesitated before stepping closer, his fingers brushing against the cold, uneven surface. As he did, the whispers that had tormented him for so long returned, only this time they were clearer. No longer just murmurs, but voices, distinct and full of sorrow. "You have found us," one voice whispered. Thomas yanked his hand away, his pulse hammering. The dust on the slab shifted, revealing something beneath. Carefully, he wiped away more of the debris, exposing a series of names, hundreds of them, chiseled into the stone. Many had been worn away by time, but one at the bottom was still perfectly legible. Eleanor Sinclair. Thomas's breath hitched. His grandmother's name. A wave of nausea washed over him. He staggered backward, his mind spinning. She had warned him about this house, had pleaded with him never to go near it. But why? How had she known? And why was her name here among the countless others? Before he could process it, the chamber trembled, dust and pebbles cascading from the ceiling. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The voices rose in intensity, filling the space with their desperate wails. "We were buried here," another voice cried, "trapped, forgotten." A gust of wind surged through the chamber, whipping Thomas's hair back. The ground beneath the stone slab cracked, deep fissures forming in the rock. Something was coming. Something powerful, ancient, and furious. Thomas had to make a choice. Stay and uncover the truth of his grandmother's connection to this place, or run and never look back. The decision was made for him when the stone slab split down the middle, revealing a gaping abyss beneath it. From the darkness below, a single, piercing eye opened, and it was looking right at him. Chapter 8. The Ghostly Lament. Thomas stood frozen, his mind reeling as the abyss beneath the stone slab yawned wider. The single, luminous eye peering up at him was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, flickering like an ember in the depths of the cavern. The whispers, once frantic and filled with sorrow, now became a mournful wail, echoing through the stone walls around him. He took a shaky step back as a gust of cold air rushed past him, carrying the scent of decay and something older, something that had been trapped in the dark for centuries. The eye blinked, slow, deliberate, its gaze never leaving him. Then, from the pit below, a figure began to rise. It was no longer just a shadow or a whisper, but something tangible, something ancient. The figure was draped in tattered robes, its form obscured by darkness, its hands bony and gnarled. The symbols etched into the stone walls around Thomas began to glow faintly, pulsating in rhythm with the creature's slow, deliberate movements. "You have come too far." The voice that emerged was neither loud nor angry, but weighed down with immeasurable sorrow. "And now, you must bear witness." The chamber trembled violently, and Thomas fell to his knees. The walls seemed to close in, shifting as if the very foundation of the house was alive. The wails grew deafening, no longer whispers, but full-throated cries of despair and agony. The spirits of the forgotten, the shadows writhed around him, taking form. Faces, distorted with pain, twisted through the darkness. Their eyes, hollow and endless, bore into him, pleading, mourning. They reached for him, not in anger, but in desperation. They needed him to listen, to understand. Thomas clenched his jaw, forcing himself to meet their gaze. "What happened here?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. The robed figure extended its skeletal hand, pointing toward the stone slab. The glowing names shimmered, their edges warping, as though trying to rewrite history. Then, slowly, a vision began to take shape in the darkness. He saw the house as it once was, magnificent, towering over the land, its halls filled with life. He saw people, dozens of them, gathered in the chamber below, their expressions a mixture of fear and reverence. He saw rituals performed, symbols traced in blood, offerings made to something that lurked beyond the veil of sight. They bound us here, the spirits whispered. For power, for greed, we were sacrificed to feed the house, to keep it alive. Thomas's breath caught. The house itself had been built upon something evil, something unnatural. And his grandmother, Eleanor Sinclair, had known. She had escaped it. But at what cost? The vision shattered, plunging the chamber back into darkness. The shadows recoiled, the robed figure's light flickering like a dying flame. "You must set us free," the figure rasped, "or you will join us." The abyss beneath the slab yawned wider, and the light of the single eye dimmed. The spirits around him wailed, their forms flickering, their torment reaching its peak. Thomas knew what he had to do. He had to break the cycle. Gathering every ounce of courage, he took a deep breath and stepped toward the abyss, prepared to face whatever came next. Chapter 9. The Final Descent. Thomas stood on the precipice of the abyss, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The darkness before him was no longer just an absence of light. It pulsed, alive, a void that breathed and beckoned him forward. The spirits around him wailed, their voices growing frantic, desperate. The robed figure remained still, its skeletal hand outstretched. "You must finish what was started," the figure intoned, its voice hollow and distant. Thomas swallowed hard, gripping the locket in his palm. He had come this far, and now the truth was unavoidable. His grandmother had once faced this same terror and had managed to escape. But had she truly been free? Her name had been carved into the slab. The names of hundreds before her had been too. They had all been part of the ritual, their souls bound to the house. But why? The abyss pulsed again, and a deep, guttural whisper slithered through the cavern. "Release me!" It was ancient, layered with voices, each one pleading, commanding, weeping. Thomas took a step forward, the weight of the spirits pressing down on him. The air thickened, turning heavy like water. His lungs burned as he struggled to breathe. He gritted his teeth, pushing against the force, pulling him downward. The slab behind him continued to crack, the stone splitting apart as though the house itself was resisting him. Then, suddenly, the robed figure raised its hands. The walls trembled, and from the abyss, something stirred. A hand, massive, gnarled, impossibly long, emerged from the pit. Its fingers clawed at the ground, dragging itself upward. The spirits shrieked, scattering like frightened birds. The figure in the robe stepped aside, bowing its head. "It is awake!" Thomas staggered backward, sheer terror gripping his mind. The creature, whatever it was, had been buried here for centuries. The house had been built to contain it. The rituals, the sacrifices, they had all been meant to keep it locked away. But now, it was breaking free. He had a choice. He could run, as his grandmother had, leaving this horror for someone else to discover. Or he could end it. Clutching the locket, he remembered the whisper in the darkness, the voice that had called his name, the plea that had carried across time. Let go. With a deep breath, he hurled the locket into the abyss. The moment it disappeared into the void, the walls shuddered violently. A deafening scream erupted from the pit, and the hand recoiled, writhing in agony. The darkness convulsed, consuming itself, collapsing inward. The ground beneath him cracked apart, the chamber crumbling. Thomas turned and ran, dodging falling debris, as the house above gave its final death rattle. The spirit's wails turned to a single, unified cry, a cry of release. The darkness imploded, and then silence. When Thomas finally emerged, gasping into the night air, the house was gone. Nothing remained but ruins. Dust settling over the land where it once stood. He fell to his knees, exhaustion overtaking him. The locket, his only connection to the past, was gone. The voices had faded. He had set them free. But as he looked toward the horizon, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, someone, was still watching. Chapter 10. Beyond the floorboards. Thomas sat on the edge of the ruins, his breathing unsteady, his body aching from exhaustion. The house was gone. The ritual had been broken. The spirits had been freed. But as he stared into the smoldering remains, he couldn't shake the sensation that something was still unfinished. The air around him was eerily still, almost as if the world itself had been waiting for this moment. He glanced down at his trembling hands, dirt-streaked and raw, the faint impression of the locket's chain still embedded in his palm. He had thrown it into the abyss, but a part of him wondered, had it truly been enough? A cold breeze rustled through the trees, carrying a whisper that sent a shudder through his spine. He stiffened, his heart skipping a beat. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but he knew what he had heard. Thomas. His head snapped toward the ruins. The ground where the house once stood was cracked, the foundation still littered with remnants of its past. He stepped forward cautiously, the soles of his boots crunching against the brittle remains of what was once the floorboards. As he neared the center, a peculiar sensation gripped him. A strange pull, as though something beneath him was waiting. Kneeling down, he pressed his hand against the earth. The dirt was loose, unsettled. He dug his fingers into it, scooping away layer after layer, his pulse quickening with every handful. Then his fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. His breath caught in his throat. It was the locket. Impossible. He had thrown it into the abyss. He had watched it disappear into the void. And yet, here it was, resting just beneath the surface, waiting for him. The metal gleamed under the moonlight, untouched, as if time had not passed. A deep sense of unease settled in his chest as he turned it over, hesitating before opening it. The photograph inside was the same. His grandmother's face staring back at him, her expression just as haunting as before. But something had changed. Something was different. Beneath the faded image, new words had been etched into the metal, words that had not been there before. It is not over. A shadow flickered across the ruins. The wind howled, and the whispers returned, louder this time, curling around him like unseen fingers. The house was gone, but whatever had been buried beneath it was not.